Margot Reyes didn't know what she had just done. She smiled, smug, saccharine, as she tore the boarding pass in half, right in front of the woman who quietly built the federal system that allowed her plane to take off. "Maybe next time, dress like you belong here," she said, voice syrupy but sharp. The two halves of the first-class boarding pass floated into the trash like scraps of paper from a rejected contract. And the woman? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't protest. She just reached for her watch. The boarding area fell into a strange hush. Celeste Monroe stood still, perfectly still, as the line of business-class travelers behind her grew restless. A man in a gray pullover glanced at his phone. A woman in heels sighed loud enough to be heard 3 rows down, but no one spoke up, because in their eyes, she didn't belong here. Not in slacks that weren't ironed crisp, not in a button-up with no designer tag, and certainly not with skin like hers. "Ma'am," Margot tried again, faking patience. "This lane is reserved for first-class and priority boarding only. Economy is back there." She smiled again like she was doing Celeste a favor. The kind of smile people give before they shut a door in your face. Celeste turned her wrist, tapped her smartwatch. A small blue pulse blinked silently beneath her sleeve. Her screen lit up with a single line. GridLink monitoring activated. Passive ethics scan, Gate 17A. She didn't press anything else, not yet. A man stepped out from the cabin. Captain Don Halbrook, mid-50s, square shoulders, military posture, no smile. "What's the problem here?" he asked, though his tone already held a verdict. "She attempted to board without elite clearance," Margot said sweetly, holding up the now destroyed boarding pass like a trophy. "She?" Celeste asked softly. Halbrook gave her one look, one long look. He didn't ask for her name. Didn't check ID, didn't scan anything. Just looked at her, then said, "Unless you can prove your tier, I'll have to ask you to step aside and let real first-class passengers through." Real. That word echoed in the air like a slap. A few heads turned. No one spoke. Celeste didn't flinch. She never did. She'd been through this before, not just at airports, but in boardrooms, fund meetings, even hotels she funded. Same tone, same assumption. You don't belong. But the thing about assumptions, they collapse under data. She stepped to the side, not backing away, but reaching into her carry-on. From it, she pulled a second boarding pass. This one didn't carry any airline branding. It was raw, issued from the back end of the system itself. The barcode glowed under the LED lights above. She held it up. Not for them, for the camera in the ceiling corner. "Ma'am," Margot said sharply now, "security can assist you if you're confused about your ticket." Celeste looked at her, calm, direct. "You just tore federal property." Halbrook scoffed. "That was a boarding pass, not a nuclear code." Celeste's eyes didn't blink. Her watch vibrated again. GridLink protocol Tier 1 available. Confirm. Yes, no. She didn't confirm. She waited. Margot leaned in one last time, her voice tightening. "You're not flying first class today? Let it go." That was the cue. Celeste tapped yes. A soft ping, quiet, almost gentle. But 1,200 miles away, in Arlington, Virginia, the core of GridLink Core lit up red. Within 15 seconds, FAA terminals in 152 airports received an alert. Tier 1 ethics lockdown triggered origin. Final authenticator. C. Monroe affected. 152 airports. Transaction freeze 8.1 AIBOR. In the cockpit, the co-pilot frowned. "Captain, tower just revoked clearance. GridLink lockout. They're grounding us." Captain Halbrook's jaw clenched. Margot's tablet blinked red. Access denied. System lock. She tapped again. Nothing. Then looked up, right at Celeste, now seated in 1A. Calm, silent, tablet open on her lap. Margot swallowed hard, because in that moment, she realized the woman she'd just humiliated wasn't a passenger. She was the system, From row 8C, travel blogger Ethan Collins watched through his phone. He wasn't just recording anymore. He was live. His caption? They denied her seat. She denied their right to fly. GridLock, Sinclair Protocol, set Telltales. Back in 1A, Celeste typed 3 words into her tablet. Incident logged. Documentation pending. FAA review enabled. She never looked at them again. Not Margot, not Halbrook, not the stairs, because this wasn't personal. This was structural. This was how power moved, not with shouting, but with systems that didn't forget. Tell us, have you ever seen someone flip the rules without raising their voice? Drop your city below. Tell us where you're watching from, because the sky, it just got colder. And someone, somewhere, just learned what happens when you try to erase the woman who designed the rules. The pilot still hadn't moved. Captain Don Halbrook sat in the cockpit, gripping the armrest of his seat like it might answer the question burning in his brain. What the hell just happened? A moment ago, everything was on schedule. Boarding complete. Flight plan approved. Weather clear. Now, the flight dashboard flashed red. The screen that typically displayed airport clearances and routing codes was replaced by a stark, blinking banner. Clearance denied. Ethics Tier 1 lockdown in effect. Next to it, a smaller message scrolled in federal gray. Source, GridLink Core, verified by final authenticator C. Monroe. Halbrook turned to his co-pilot. Get Arlington on the phone, now! The younger man nodded and began punching in override channels, but it was useless. Everything rerouted back to one terminal, GridLink Control Node 01. Every request bounced. Every bypass failed. No one could lift the lockdown, because in the structure of the GridLink core system, only one person had the final override authority, and she was sitting in 1A. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, the flight crew was scrambling. Margot stood behind the check-in desk, furiously tapping her tablet. Her smile had long since disappeared, replaced by a tense, twitching jaw and sweaty palms. Every internal system, crew scheduling, passenger verification, service manifest, was now flagged. All linked back to the same message. Access suspended due to ethics breach. Subsection 6, bias behavior during boarding procedure. Margot blinked hard, trying to process. She'd humiliated passengers before, denied upgrades, even made the occasional mistake on purpose. It never mattered. But this? This wasn't just some complaint filed to customer service. This was something federal, something that moved money, something that could shut down runways. And somehow, it had started with that woman, the one she'd treated like a nobody. Up in the air traffic tower, it wasn't any calmer. Houston Command had received an emergency alert that the entire airspace slotting system was glitching. Not because of tech failure, but because GridLink Core had pulled operational sync from 152 partner airports. That meant no runway coordination, no baggage syncing, no ground crew confirmations. Dozens of flights were stalled, not just the one to Atlanta. Behind one console, a senior air traffic controller stared at the screen. Did we just get locked out of our own sky? He muttered. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, the atmosphere had gone icy. The front of the plane, first class, was mostly empty now. Most passengers hadn't boarded before the lockdown hit. A few in business were whispering, speculating, but one row stood out. Row 8C, where a young man named Ethan Collins held up his phone, still recording. He whispered into the mic, "Guys, I think we're witnessing a federal lockdown in real time. The woman in 1A just triggered something. I don't know who she is, but this is big." His live stream viewer count spiked from 4,300 to 38,000 in less than a minute. Then came the comments. Wait, is that GridLink? Like the federal ethics system? Bro, she's the one who controls it? She's not just a CEO, she's the system. OMG. This is a Telltales video waiting to happen. In 1A, Celeste Monroe sat perfectly still, reading data on her tablet. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't even surprised. She'd built GridLink Core for this exact reason. Because she knew Systems didn't need to yell to be effective. They needed to be unbreakable. And now, the system was doing exactly what it was designed to do: flag racial bias, lock operations, protect dignity in real time. Across her screen, status updates flowed in. FAA compliance sync, suspended flight clearance registry, locked ethics dashboard, broadcast pending. Then came the next alert, the one she knew would scare them. Institutional payment freeze active. Cross-airport transaction chain halted. 8.1B in transit funds held. Not frozen by a bank, not by a court order. Frozen by the same data system that let airlines fly in the first place. Back in the cockpit, the co-pilot swallowed hard. "Sir, we just got a confirmation from FAA Atlanta. They've grounded every inbound flight from GridLink flagged routes." Halbrook rubbed his face. "We're not just delayed. We're shut down." A silence settled. For the first time in 17 years of flying, Halbrook felt something he hadn't felt since flight school: powerless. On the ground, chaos bloomed. Airport management began pulling in supervisors. The regional operations director of Clear Access Airways was called mid-lunch and rushed back to his office. His secretary barely got the words out. "Sir, the Houston flight's been grounded, but it's not weather or mechanical. It's ethics protocol." "Whose ethics?" "GridLink." He dropped his sandwich. 30 minutes later, a private message pinged on Celeste's tablet. From the Department of Transportation, a simple message. "Confirm Tier 1 lockdown origin. See Monroe?" "Yes, no." Celeste tapped yes. 5 seconds later, her screen showed Federal Ethics Authority trigger verified. Flight CS-147 logged as incident origin. Crew ID Reyes Halbrook under review. And still, she said nothing. No yelling, no press, no social media. She let the silence do what her voice never could. Let the data speak. Let the truth document itself. On the tarmac, Halbrook stepped off the plane. Margot followed, visibly shaken. Security officers were waiting at the end of the jet bridge. "Are we being arrested?" she snapped. "No," one said. "You're being documented." Inside the terminal, word spread fast. The airline systems froze. Passengers stormed the help desks, demanding answers. But there were none. Just screens that kept showing the same phrase: operations paused due to ethics protocol violation. In the press room of the FAA, phones started ringing. Journalists picked up the scent. CNN, MSNBC, Vox, even local Houston reporters. But none of them got to the story first. That credit belonged to Ethan Collins, the 22-year-old live streamer who uploaded a clip titled, "CEO Gets Denied Her Seat, Then Denies 152 Airports Their Flights." A Telltales #GridLink #system check. It hit 1.4 million views in 6 hours. By the time Celeste stepped off the plane, the world had already begun to whisper her name. But she wasn't interested in being a trending topic. She didn't need to explain herself to the public, because in 3 days, she'd be testifying before Congress. And this time, they'd listen. Not because she was loud, but because the sky had stopped moving. And they all knew who had the key. If you could stop a system with one touch, would you use it? Drop your thoughts and let us know where you're watching from, because the system just woke up, and it's watching everything now. The Capitol didn't notice the freeze at first. Not when the alert hit Houston. Not when 152 airports flagged red. Not even when the $8.1 billion freeze hit the wire system. But when 4 airline CEOs canceled their DC luncheons and booked emergency sessions with legal teams, that's when Congress looked up. In a private office 2 blocks from the FAA headquarters, Jared Kingsley, Deputy Secretary of Transportation, stared at a screen full of red squares. Each one marked a frozen airport node. "We've had cyber attacks before," his assistant said nervously. "But this isn't foreign. This came from GridLink, our own system." Kingsley narrowed his eyes. "GridLink doesn't act on its own." "It wasn't the system," she replied. "It was a person." A name flashed across the top of the feed. C. Monroe. Final authenticator code. Valid Kingsley dropped into his chair. Oh my God, they finally pushed her! At that exact moment, inside a marble and glass office high above Wall Street, Grayson Weller, CEO of SkyAxis Holdings, slammed his fist against the table. Who the hell gave this woman that kind of power? His CTO, sweating under pressure, responded, "You did, sir, 3 years ago, when we signed the GridLink compliance mandate." Grayson blinked. Back then, it had just seemed like a check-the-box federal requirement. Some initiative pushed by civil rights commissions and ethics committees. He never expected it to shut down his airline's ability to move planes, fuel, or credit. Across the table, his CFO spoke quietly. "We've got $6 and $12 million in pending transactions caught in the freeze, baggage contracts, lease transfers, international payments. If this continues through the weekend..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Grayson buried his head in his hands. "Find her," he growled. "We need to talk." But Celeste Monroe wasn't answering calls. She wasn't on a media tour. She wasn't sitting with lawyers. She was home. At her quiet brick townhouse in Arlington, Virginia, sipping tea, watching the data cascade across her monitor. She'd already received the formal summons from Congress. She'd testify on Monday. Until then, she was letting the system speak for itself. Back at FAA headquarters, the Emergency Ethics Committee was in full motion. A panel of 7 had been called, reps from FAA, DOT, NIST, and a private ethics watchdog. But no one in the room looked comfortable, because the question hanging in the air wasn't, why did she trigger GridLock? The real question was, why did we give her the power to do it, and then ignore her warnings for 3 years? 3 floors down, in a side conference room, 2 staffers reviewed Celeste's original 312-page white paper, Predictive Ethics Failures in Aviation Infrastructure. She'd warned about biased crew behavior. She'd warned about systemic retaliation against black and brown passengers. She'd warned about real-time correction protocols. And they, the industry, had smiled and nodded, signed her contracts, took her compliance rating, then quietly buried her proposals. Until now. By Saturday morning, Ethan Collins' live stream had hit 12.2 million views. The clip had been dubbed, subtitled, and reposted in 15 languages. Dozens of creators were reacting to it. #Telltales was trending worldwide. #GridLock was now its own subreddit, and one hashtag had emerged that no airline exec could ignore. "We fly when she says so." Meanwhile, in a quiet cafe in Alexandria, a 9-year-old girl named Lena watched the video with her father. She stared at Celeste, calm in her seat, tapping a screen that silenced the entire sky. "Daddy," she asked, "is she like a superhero?" Her father smiled. "No, baby, she's something stronger." He sipped his coffee. "She's the one who writes the rules." By Sunday afternoon, the damage had spread. Of the 152 frozen airports, 89 had to delay international departures. Several European partners began questioning U.S. aviation ethics. 2 ESG investment firms withdrew $380 million in funding from airlines caught in the lockdown. Then came the phone call no one wanted to take. From the White House, President's Office, Ethics and Infrastructure Liaison. Tell Monroe will hear her testimony first on Monday, before the airlines, before the FAA, before anyone. That night, Celeste received a quiet knock at her door. It wasn't press. It wasn't protest. It was Eleanor Brooks, retired federal judge and chair of the Interagency Ethics Commission. The same woman who'd once helped Celeste defend GridLink during the Senate confirmation hearings. Now she stood on Celeste's porch. No press, no cameras, just presence. Celeste opened the door, calm as ever. "You saw?" Eleanor nodded. "They finally saw." A pause. "Are you ready for Monday?" Celeste didn't flinch. "I was born ready." At 10:14 p.m., FAA servers received one final broadcast from GridLink Core before the system entered public oversight freeze. Tier 1 lockdown maintained. All clearance systems remain suspended until post-hearing audit. Passenger, Monroe.ce. Incident origin, 06:07 a.m. CST, Gate 17A. In fine print, one more line glowed at the bottom of the screen. Flight Ethics, Rule 19.3, Final Authenticator may not be overridden without full federal review. And somewhere in a boardroom in Chicago, a regional airline CEO stared at the line in horror. They couldn't buy their way around it, couldn't issue PR to soften it, couldn't file a lawsuit fast enough. Because Celeste Monroe hadn't made a scene. She'd made a system, and the world was finally forced to live inside it. What would you do if your silence could shake 152 airports? Drop your thoughts and tell us where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, Congress won't be asking what went wrong. They'll be asking, how do we make sure it never happens again? It was barely 8:00 a.m. when Celeste Monroe walked through the wide marble doors of the Dirksen Senate office building. No press escort, no legal entourage. Just her. Hair tied back in a clean bun. Charcoal gray suit. Simple black flats. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to document. By the time she reached room 236, the chamber was already packed. Senators, cabinet members, airline CEOs who had flown in by private jet because, well, commercial flights weren't moving much these days. In the back, journalists scribbled. Cameras clicked. Telltales live streamers were huddled in corners, whispering updates. And in the center of it all, under a carved wooden placard that read, Ethics and Transport Oversight Hearing, a seat with her name on it. Miss Monroe, Chairman Wilkes began. Voice clipped, practiced. Thank you for appearing today. Celeste nodded once. It's Dr. Monroe. A pause. Then a tight smile from the chairman. Of course, Dr. Monroe. The opening hour was what she expected. Senators grandstanding, airline CEOs feigning ignorance, legal counsels tiptoeing around the word bias. Celeste waited, calm, hands folded, eyes never flinching, until finally, Senator Rivas leaned in. Dr. Monroe, do you believe your use of GridLink core to freeze 152 airports was excessive? The room quieted. Every mic was hot. Every pen was ready. Celeste took a breath. No, she said. I believe it was overdue. Gasps, murmurs. One CEO dropped his pen. Celeste continued. I didn't shut down airports. The system did. The same system you all approved and ignored until it embarrassed you on live stream. Rivas blinked. And what do you think justifies that kind of disruption? Celeste leaned in. You call it disruption. I call it correction. Correction for decades of discriminatory service, silent profiling, and unchecked crew power. She tapped the folder in front of her. In this file are 782 verified complaints submitted through GridLink's passive monitoring logs, all tagged as low-level racial bias, all dismissed by airline compliance teams. She paused. Flight CS-147 was just the first one I didn't dismiss. In the back row, a junior DOJ official mouthed, "Holy sh!" Chairman Wilkes cleared his throat. Dr. Monroe, surely there were other remedies. I used the remedy you gave me, she cut in. You approved GridLink as a real-time ethics enforcement platform. You codified its Tier 1 lockdown when patterns of structural bias crossed the defined threshold. She looked around the room. Your only surprise is that someone finally used the protocol the way it was designed. At that moment, Celeste reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second binder. Black cover, sealed in red tape. This is the proposal I sent 2 years ago. GridLink, Phase 2, Passenger Equity Certification and Federal Oversight. It outlines a shared ethics rating system for both airlines and crew, tied to federal licensing. She placed it on the table. You shelved it without reading. Now the cameras leaned in. The feed went viral in real time. At GridLink, Phase 2 had passenger equity now, as she read the room and wrote it down. A voice cut through the tension. Grayson Weller, the SkyAxis CEO, finally spoke. Dr. Monroe, with respect, your system has frozen $8.1 billion in active transit. That's not just infrastructure. That's jobs, commerce, global trade. Celeste turned to him, unblinking. You're worried about $8.1 billion? She opened the third binder. This is the cost of discriminatory flight practices over the past 15 years. Lost lawsuits, settlements, insurance inflation, class action damages, and tourism impact. Total, $14.3 billion. She pushed the binder forward. And that doesn't include the human cost. A beat of silence. Then, applause broke out from the gallery. Not loud, but real. Chairman Wilkes banged his gavel. Order! This is not a rally. Celeste sat still. Then, with quiet conviction, she looked up again. Chairman Wilkes, with all due respect, it should be. Outside the hearing, the mood was electric. Protesters lined the streets. Posters showed her face beside the phrase, "She didn't yell, she rewrote the rules." CNN declared it the most important transportation ethics hearing in 25 years. Inside a control room in Atlanta, a young black pilot whispered to his co-captain, "She just changed the game." By evening, Celeste walked quietly back to her car. Her phone vibrated. A text. From Eleanor Brooks. Well done. They're calling an emergency vote Thursday. GridLink Phase 2 might finally pass. Another message came in, this time from the President's Transportation Liaison. Dr. Monroe, your system just saved us. Let's discuss National Adoption Framework next week. Celeste sat in her driver's seat, eyes on the Capitol dome. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Now you see it." In the days to come, 3 airline CEOs would resign. FAA would issue a full audit of crew behavior policies, and the passenger equity certification would become a federal requirement by summer. But none of that happened because Celeste made a scene. It happened because she built a system strong enough to withstand silence and loud enough to speak when no one else could. If justice had a protocol, would your name be on the code? Tell us where you're watching from. And never forget, quiet power is still power. 4 days after her Senate testimony, Celeste Monroe stepped into the Federal Ethics Integration Center for the first time in nearly a year. The place had changed. Old portraits were gone. The lobby now displayed a looping digital ticker. GridLink lockdown active. 152 airports. Phase 2. Pending approval. She passed the line of interns, frozen mid-whisper, and nodded once toward the reception desk. No one stopped her. This time, no one dared to. Inside Conference Room D, a dozen officials waited. FAA administrators, DOT legal, 2 retired military advisors, and across the glass table, the President's aviation reform delegate. The woman stood as Celeste entered. "Dr. Monroe." Celeste offered a slight nod. "Let's get to work." For the next hour, they reviewed everything. The GridLink Phase 2 blueprint, updated metrics from the lockdown, financial ripple effects, 8.1 and counting, ethics scores per airline, airport, and crew region. The delegate folded her hands. "So, this isn't just punishment." Celeste looked her straight in the eye. "No, this is prevention. Punishment happens after damage. GridLink exists, so it never gets that far again. The real magic happened in the second hour." Celeste pulled up a simulation of GridLink Phase 2. She explained how each airline would receive a live passenger equity score, updated per flight, based on crew behavior, complaint validation, and system observation. Scores below 75 would trigger pre-warnings. Scores below 60 would limit federal airspace rights. Scores below 50, lockout from all FAA-partnered airports. "And what's the incentive to comply?" someone asked. Celeste didn't hesitate. "Money." She walked to the board and wrote 3 words. Ethics yield rating, a new metric, directly tied to insurance premiums, federal subsidies, and investor rankings. An airline with high equity compliance would pay less for capital access, gain priority in federal contracts, and enjoy top-tier ESG alignment ratings. "And who governs the score?" a retired colonel asked. Celeste turned. "I do." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the President's delegate said what everyone was thinking. "So you're not just proposing an ethics system, you're proposing a new economy of trust." Celeste sat down. Exactly. By the next morning, CNN, Forbes, and Bloomberg all carried the same headline. GridLink Phase 2 moves forward. FAA considers passenger equity as mandatory metric. Back at SkyAxis Corporate HQ, Grayson Weller paced his office. "We underestimated her," his VP muttered. Grayson didn't look up. "No, we underestimated the system she was building." Meanwhile, Celeste was already 10 steps ahead. She met quietly with Equivest, the largest aviation insurance group in North America. They had insured 47 of the 58 airlines affected by the lockdown. And now, they were panicking. "Your system cut our risk model in half," the CEO admitted. "We need to know what comes next." Celeste pulled out the Ethics Sync API spec. "This," she said, "is the back end. You'll feed into it. You'll flag risk early, and in exchange, you get real-time compliance data before anyone else." He blinked. "And the airlines? They'll comply, or they'll collapse." By Friday, the FAA held a press conference. Standing before a massive screen glowing with GridLink's dashboard, the administrator announced, "As of this moment, all FAA-certified airlines will be required to enroll in the Passenger Equity Monitoring Framework. Non-compliance will result in restricted gate access, limited routing, and audit-triggered financial holds. The GridLink lockdown will remain in effect until initial compliance is confirmed." That night, Celeste watched the press briefing from her home. She wasn't smiling. She was mapping. Across her desk were folders labeled Ethics Core, Europe, Civil Aviation Trust Score, Africa, Asia PAX 2026 Proposal, Equity Index, Latin American Roots. This wasn't just about the US. GridLink was going global. A few hours later, she received a video message from Lena, the 9-year-old girl who'd asked her dad if Celeste was a superhero. "Hi, Dr. Monroe. My class watched you on the news today. We're doing a project now on airline fairness. My teacher said you didn't yell. You just made rules so no one had to yell ever again." Celeste paused, then saved the video to her favorites. By the end of the week, 3 more airlines joined early compliance. 2 major airports installed GridLink local nodes. 1. Canadian Air Council requested a meeting, and behind it all, a quiet woman in a gray suit with a code key that could silence the sky or rewrite the way we fly forever. Some men don't take being outsmarted well, especially when the one outsmarting them is a black woman who never raised her voice. Inside a private dining room at the Metropolitan Club in DC, a group of airline executives, aviation lobbyists, and their legal consultants gathered behind closed doors. Lights low, whiskey glasses full, voices sharp. "GridLink is a damn Trojan horse," muttered Felix Crane, CEO of Aerostar International. "We gave that system access to our entire back end. Now she's using it to grade us like school children." A VP from JetCorps added, "You realize what this means, right? If we don't stop Phase 2, every crew member will be under live surveillance. And worse, accountability." Someone else said it out loud. "If we don't kill this now, she'll own the skies." So they got to work. They drafted a counterproposal, a third-party oversight bill claiming to restore airline autonomy. They launched Project Clearwings, a $42 million lobbying campaign to block the federal rollout of GridLink Phase 2. They scheduled private dinners with senators, reactivated PAC donations, booked national ad slots painting GridLink as an overreach of federal power. One ad even featured a tearful flight attendant saying, "I was suspended for smiling the wrong way." GridLink doesn't protect, it punishes. By the end of the week, 3 senators had publicly questioned whether GridLink violated operational freedoms. One mainstream network ran a special called Power versus Privacy. Should airlines be ruled by code? But Celeste, she didn't flinch. Instead, she released a quiet 3-minute video through the FAA's official ethics portal. No flashy editing, no music, just her, seated in her office. "You're not being watched, you're being witnessed. There's a difference." She stared straight into the lens. Accountability feels like punishment to the guilty, but to the rest of us, it feels like protection. That video hit 17.4 million views in 48 hours. Meanwhile, something else was happening. A whistleblower, a former HR director at JetCorps, leaked a 178-page document to an investigative journalist. Title: Bias Suppression Protocols, Internal Memo Only. The document revealed that airlines had internal systems to suppress or delay racial discrimination complaints, so they wouldn't trigger ethics audits. The journalist ran the story under a brutal headline: They knew, they delayed, they calculated. Celeste didn't respond. She didn't need to. The system was doing what it was built to do. A day later, GridLink auto-flagged 4 major airlines for deliberate ethics manipulation. Their scores dropped below 50. Lockout triggered. Gate access revoked. 1.3B and route permissions suspended overnight. And when one CEO called Celeste's office demanding a reversal, her assistant replied calmly, "We don't override integrity metrics. You should have thought about that before you called it just PR." But they didn't stop. The same lobby group funded a lawsuit. Clearwings vi. FAA their claim? That Celeste Monroe held undue influence over a federal enforcement system. Their strategy? Use race, use gender, use fear. Their legal brief referred to her as an unelected civilian with unchecked algorithmic authority. One section read, "No single person, especially one without federal confirmation, should possess such power over the nation's airways." Celeste read the filing, then highlighted one sentence in red. "The respondent has used her identity and trauma to sway public favor." She underlined it, then whispered, "There it is." That night, she released a second video. Again, calm, precise, chilling. "They want you to think this is about code. It's not. It's about comfort. And who gets to stay comfortable? They're not afraid of GridLink. They're afraid of fairness with teeth." Within 72 hours, a black pilot testified before Congress about years of route discrimination. A Latina crew member revealed being told to tone down her accent on premium flights. A mother posted a video of her autistic son being denied boarding for making other passengers uncomfortable. And the hashtag returned. "We fly when she says so." The lawsuit was dismissed within a week. The judge wrote, "The system in question is not biased. It is responsive. And for the first time, the skies are held to the same standard as the ground." But Celeste knew what was coming next. Not just legal attacks. They'd try to fracture GridLink from the inside, so she made a move before they could. She activated Clause 7.3 in the GridLink protocol. Public transparency sync. Ethics scores by airline released bi-weekly to all FAA-partnered airports. Now every ethics score was visible. Not just to airlines, not just to investors, but to passengers. Before they bought a ticket, they'd know the airline's score. Before they boarded, they'd see the route rating. Before anyone smiled fake at the gate, the system was already watching and ready to report. Airlines couldn't hide anymore, and neither could bias. Celeste didn't build a system to control. She built one so no one had to be controlled. And that's what they were really afraid of. Would you fly on a plane that fails the dignity test? Tell us where you're watching from. And remember, when power gets loud, system design speaks louder. It began with a call from Geneva, a quiet inquiry, a private request, a question that could only be asked by someone who had watched everything unfold from a distance, and finally decided silence was no longer an option. "Dr. Monroe," the voice said, smooth, Swiss accented, "we'd like you to advise the International Civil Aviation Ethics Council, off record, just a conversation." Celeste paused, then smiled, ever so slightly. "I don't do off-record anymore." 3 days later, she landed in Zurich. No press coverage, no photo ops, just a nondescript sedan, a thick folder tucked under her arm, and a woman who had learned the sky didn't change because you wished it to. It changed when you wrote new protocols. Inside the marble boardroom of the ICAEC, a mix of delegates awaited. From Germany, France, South Africa, Japan, Brazil, the UAE, and 2 from Canada. Each had heard of GridLink. Most were skeptical. Some were afraid. Only one, the woman from Nairobi, stood when Celeste entered. "You walked so our girls wouldn't be walked over again. Thank you." Celeste nodded, quietly, then opened her binder. Her presentation was titled, "Operational Equity Across Sovereign Skies, a Framework for Passenger Dignity Compliance." It wasn't a plea. It was an offer. A global GridLink variant, modular, ethics neutral, adaptable to each region's needs, but rooted in 5 core tenets: real-time behavior accountability, passenger protection regardless of passport, crew conduct tied to route-level performance, ethics, data transparency for regulators and flyers, sanction-based enforcement for repeated violations. She finished with one question: "Do you want your skies ruled by PR or by principle?" Silence. Then the delegate from France cleared his throat. "And you believe the American model can be global?" Celeste met his gaze. "No, I believe justice is global. The system just needed someone to start the draft." Within a week, 4 countries expressed interest in piloting the framework. Canada was first, then Kenya, then Germany, then Chile. Each would deploy a localized GridLink light system across their top 3 airports. Each agreed to share ethics data with the FAA in real time. "Airspace without borders," the Nairobi delegate said, "deserves ethics without borders." In response, the European Airline Association issued a panicked statement. "We urge caution before implementing untested systems that prioritize social metrics over operational continuity." Celeste responded, not with press, but with data. A 40-page report showing that routes with high GridLink ratings had 17% fewer in-air incidents, 23% higher passenger satisfaction, 31% better crew morale retention. It wasn't social theory, it was operational truth. In private, the ICAEC chairwoman told her, "You realize you're building the first global ethics mesh for aviation, right?" Celeste didn't flinch. "No, I'm building the first fair one." Meanwhile, back in the US, headlines shifted from controversy to case study. The GridLink effect, how ethics became the new currency in air travel. Passengers now book by equity score. Airlines scramble to adapt. Black woman quietly rewires global aviation standards. This is her story. Celeste was invited to keynote the World Aviation Summit in Singapore. She declined. Instead, she sent a 90-second video. "Power isn't holding the mic. It's rewriting the settings so others get to speak." It played before 5,000 delegates. She received a standing ovation from a continent away, but not everyone clapped. Inside a private boardroom in London, leaders from 5 legacy carriers planned a coalition response. "We need to delay the rollout. We need to push ESG funds to pause investment. We need to isolate her." But the truth? It was too late. Celeste wasn't a threat. GridLink was, and GridLink wasn't her anymore. It was now in Geneva, in Toronto, in Nairobi, in Berlin, in Sao Paulo, in every airport where fairness finally had a code base. 1 week later, Celeste received a sealed envelope from the United Nations Aviation Division. It contained a single-page letter. "We formally invite Dr. Celeste Monroe to serve as Strategic Ethics Architect for the formation of the Global Passenger Dignity Framework, GPDF, the first binding ethical charter in international aviation history." She folded the letter, looked out the window of her hotel room in Zurich, and whispered, "It's no longer my system. It's our sky. What would the world look like if fairness could fly?" Tell us where you're watching from. And remember, dignity should never need a passport. It wasn't the headlines that worried her. It was the silence. The first email came from Santiago. Subject: Urgent. G-Link Protocol Misuse Incident. Celeste opened it half awake, her coffee untouched. It detailed an incident at Arturo Merino Benitez International Airport in Chile. A crew member had flagged a family for non-compliance. They were black, Brazilian. The reason? Disruptive boarding behavior. No physical aggression, no rule violations. Just a child with autism who didn't respond to the boarding queue. The parents were escorted off, publicly, brutally, and GridLink's system had confirmed the flag. Celeste froze. This wasn't how it was meant to work. By noon, the story hit South American media. By 5 p.m., protesters gathered at the airport. By midnight, the Ministry of Transport had suspended all GridLink-related operations pending review. And Celeste? She was already on a flight to Chile. Inside a small conference room in Santiago, the Chilean Deputy Director of Civil Aviation looked across the table. "You exported a system without exporting the training, Dr. Monroe." Celeste didn't defend herself. She asked for access to the footage. She watched it, twice, and with each second, her chest tightened. Not because the system failed, but because it worked exactly as coded, and that was the problem. The Chilean airport had modified the implementation protocol. They removed the cultural sensitivity layer. They stripped out the behavior bias correction model, and they trained crew to flag nonverbal noncompliance as immediate risk. In their words, they wanted a leaner, faster, safer GridLink. But what they got was a mirror of their own unspoken prejudice, dressed in her system's language. Celeste walked outside. No cameras, no staff, just her and the night. She leaned on a pillar, and for the first time in months, she cried. This wasn't just about ethics anymore. It was about what happens when power travels faster than understanding. The next day, she met with the Brazilian ambassador to Chile. He was calm, measured, but firm. "You don't get to rewrite dignity by code and then walk away when it's misused." Celeste nodded. "You're right. I'm not walking away. I'm rewriting the safeguards, globally." By week's end, Celeste had convened an emergency intercontinental ethics panel. Representatives from every GridLink partner country attended. She presented a resolution. No GridLink deployment may proceed without the full passenger culture sensitivity stack, PCSS, including autism awareness modules, bias mitigation layers, and multilingual behavioral interpretation tools. She paused. If it takes longer to deploy, so be it. Fast systems break things. Fair ones save people. Some pushed back. One delegate whispered, "This sets us back 6 months." Celeste answered, "And saves us from 6 years of lawsuits, trauma, and global loss of trust." The motion passed, unanimously, and with it, the system finally evolved from code to culture. Celeste stayed in Chile 2 more days. She visited the family, in person, no cameras, just a private apology. She listened, to the mother's pain, to the father's quiet fury, to the boy's silence. Then she left behind something not in any protocol, her private direct line. "If anyone ever flags your family again, call me first." Back in DC, a journalist asked her, "You built the most advanced ethics system in modern aviation. What's your biggest fear now?" Celeste didn't pause. That people will worship the system more than the people it's meant to protect. 2 weeks later, the Santiago airport fully reinstated GridLink, this time with full cultural compliance. And the family? They received a public apology, a lifetime dignity pass, and a private letter from Celeste herself. "You reminded the world what justice is supposed to feel like." That night, alone in her office, Celeste stared at the whiteboard. She erased a phrase she once wrote, "We watch to protect," and replaced it with, "We understand before we act." Because true equity doesn't start with code, it starts with courage. It started with a girl, 12 years old, black, named Kennedy. Her mom booked them tickets from Charlotte to Los Angeles. First class, a birthday surprise. Kennedy had never flown before. She dressed up, braided her hair the night before, even printed out her own boarding pass and highlighted her name. But at the gate, something happened. The crew called her name, asked her and her mom to step aside, said there'd been a mistake. The seats were gone, given to 2 platinum members who'd arrived last minute. When her mom protested, security was called. They were escorted out, in front of everyone. No refund, no apology, just shame. On her birthday, someone filmed it. The video hit the internet like fire. Hashtags lit up. Hashtag Kennedy's flight, #dignity, denied, #GridLink, where are you? Because here's the thing. That flight was on a GridLink-rated airline. But this time, the crew hadn't flagged anything. They'd simply bypassed the system, manually reassigned the seats, internally documented it as a technical error. And because there was no official ethics flag, GridLink didn't catch it. By noon, Celeste was trending on every platform. She built the system. She promised protection. Where is she now? Cable pundits lined up. Is this proof that GridLink can't protect the powerless? Was it ever more than a PR stunt? Is it time to return dignity enforcement to real human oversight? In a single day, the narrative flipped. From hero to hypocrite. From protector to problem. Celeste sat in her DC office, phone screen blinking non-stop. Press requests, senators, FAA administrators, all asking one question: what are you going to do? But she was already 2 steps ahead. She called an emergency press conference, but not in a hotel ballroom, not on a news set. She chose the bus stop across from the terminal where Kennedy had been denied. No podium, no security barrier, just a small, portable mic. She stood in front of Kennedy and her mom, who were seated silently behind her, and she said this: systems only catch what they're allowed to see. The failure here wasn't just technical, it was human. Someone hid injustice behind a policy screen, and that means we don't just need a smarter system, we need a braver community. She paused, then added, which is why I'm activating GridLink's final protocol, public participatory oversight. Starting today, verified passengers on every flagged flight will have 24 hours to submit anonymized observations into the system, which will be weighted alongside crew reports. No more behind-the-door dignity. If the crew can report you, you can report the crew. The reaction? Explosive. Some hailed it as the boldest transparency move in aviation history. Others called it chaos. The Airline Operators Union filed a formal complaint. Passenger reports are unreliable. They introduce emotion, exaggeration, and bias. Celeste responded with one line: so do humans with uniforms. But the backlash hit hard. 2 major airlines threatened to pull out of GridLink unless she revoked the protocol. Investors wavered. Even FAA officials grew nervous. One commissioner said, "You've given the crowd a weapon. This could backfire." Celeste scheduled a private meeting with the FAA board. She walked in alone. No legal team, no press, no script. And she listened. For 42 minutes, they grilled her. What happens if passengers lie? What if a bad actor floods the system with false flags? What if you lose control? And she answered each one directly. Control was never the point. It's accountability. I didn't build a cage. I built a mirror, and I trust people enough to look into it, even if some flinch. When she left the room, she knew what was at stake. If the board voted to override her decision, GridLink would be absorbed by a federal review panel. It would lose independence. It would become just another government checkbox, sterile, slow, diluted. They'll gut it from the inside, her COO warned. But you can still stop it. Just roll back this last protocol. That night, she didn't sleep. She walked the city. No security, no assistant, just her coat and her thoughts. She passed a row of payphones, then stopped, picked one up. No dial tone, just a flicker of memory. Her mother, calling from that exact phone years ago. They said we can't board. I'm not sure why. Can you come get me? The next morning, the FAA board vote began. Celeste didn't attend. Instead, she logged into the public GridLink portal and watched something unfold in real time. Thousands, tens of thousands of passengers submitted reports from prior flights. Some angry, some grateful, many confused. But one comment, posted anonymously, stood out. I didn't know anyone cared about the way I was treated until today. At 10:42 a.m., the FAA vote failed. GridLink retained its independence. The passenger oversight protocol remained active. In the days that followed, a new trend emerged. Flight attendants who had quietly reported racism were now backed by passengers who saw the same. Elderly passengers who had once stayed silent now wrote detailed feedback. First-class travelers who witnessed unfair reassignments used their own status to validate lower-class mistreatment. In just 2 weeks, GridLink's flight report accuracy improved by 39%. For the first time, the skies weren't just monitored. They were witnessed by all. Celeste received a letter. No name, no return address, just 5 words, written in a child's handwriting. "Thank you for believing me." She framed it, hung it right outside her office door, and every time she passed it, she remembered. The system doesn't work because it's perfect. It works because someone refused to make it private. The conference room in Geneva looked nothing like a battlefield. No weapons, no shouting, just 37 pens, stacked contracts, and the quiet hum of power being cornered. Celeste sat at the end of a long glass table. To her left, representatives from the FAA, ICAO, and EU Civil Aviation Council. To her right, CEOs from 11 of the world's largest airlines. Everyone was waiting for one document, the Global Passenger Ethics Accord. A 17-page charter Celeste had spent the past 3 months refining, clause by clause, word by word. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a final line in the sand. Sign it, or face coordinated contract freezes across 152 airports. Over $8.1 billion in regulatory-linked incentives suspended, and removal from all GridLink routing integrations. The stakes weren't subtle, and everyone in the room knew it. The Emirates executive whispered, "She's made herself the new FAA." The Lufthansa CEO replied, "No, she made herself unavoidable." The accord was more than policy. It was binding ethics infrastructure. Airlines would be required to implement the Passenger Dignity Scoring System, PDSS, publish quarterly crew behavior audits, accept independent civilian board oversight on flagged incidents, retain mandatory cultural sensitivity retraining every 18 months, be graded publicly across 5 dignity dimensions, visible to all travelers. Failure to comply meant ethics disqualification. A new status created through GridLink that auto-removed non-compliant carriers from partner airports and ESG-linked financial networks. Celeste didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She just looked at them and said, "You've monetized comfort long enough. Now you'll be held to it." The first to sign was the Brazilian Minister of Transport. Then Kenya. Then Canada. Then, slowly, one by one, the airline executives followed. Delta, Singapore Air, Air France. Even the most reluctant, United, signed after a 10-minute sidebar. By midday, 23 countries and 14 airlines had signed the accord. The last signature came from a man who hadn't spoken all morning. Richard Callaway, CEO of Monarch Air. He'd once said publicly, "The skies don't belong to feelings, they belong to systems." Now he slid the document forward and quietly added, "Turns out the systems were always people." And with that, it was done. At 4:12 p.m., Celeste stepped out of the building. There were reporters, lights, cameras. But she didn't go to the podium. Instead, she walked past them, to a small circle of students waiting outside, mostly women, mostly young. One held a notebook and said, trembling, "How do you win without shouting?" Celeste paused, looked her straight in the eye. "You write the rules before they try to silence you, and you don't stop when they do." She didn't stay for interviews, didn't wait for applause. She walked 3 blocks to a quiet cafe, sat alone, ordered tea, and opened her email. One subject line blinked. Confirmed. FAA to mandate ethics accord for all U.S. carriers by year end. She smiled, then closed the laptop. Because sometimes the most powerful sound isn't a verdict or a signature. It's the click of something wrong finally being shut off. Later that week, a letter from the White House arrived. An offer, a new position, Senior Advisor for National Ethics Infrastructure, high clearance, direct to the President. Celeste didn't even open the envelope. She forwarded it to her Chief of Staff. "Decline politely. I've done my part." Instead, she went home. For the first time in years, no press, no inbox, no flights to track, just one quiet evening. And a porch. As the sun dipped, her niece crawled into her lap. "Are you done saving the world?" Celeste laughed. "No, baby. I just showed it how to save itself." Inside, on her office wall, The framed letter from Kennedy was still there. Next to it, a new plaque, not from any agency, but handmade, painted with markers. It read, "Justice should feel like flying with your grandma." She stared at it for a moment, then turned out the lights. Before the freeze, before the 152 airports, before the headlines, the protests, the threats, and the signatures. Before all of that, there was a girl, sitting on a cracked plastic bench, holding her grandmother's coat, waiting for a flight they would never board. It was Detroit Metro. Winter of 1996. Celeste was 8. She still remembered the terminal number. B5. They were early. Too early. Her grandmother always said, "Arrive like your dignity depends on it." Celeste held the tickets with both hands. First class, 2 seats. Paid for with every Social Security check Nana had saved for a year. They were going to San Francisco to see Celeste's mother, who had just gotten clean. Just landed a job, just promised she'd cook dinner. It was the first time Celeste would see her in 2 years. But at the gate, a man in uniform stopped them, didn't even look at the tickets, said something about random security reassignment, said they'd have to give up their seats. Economy was full too, offered a refund. Later, Celeste remembered her grandmother standing silent, hands folded, voice calm but shaking. "Is this because of how we look, sir?" The man didn't answer, just turned away. They never got on the plane. They never made it to San Francisco. 2 days later, her mom OD'd. Again, this time, fatal. That bench at Gate B5 became a memory Celeste buried under degrees, job offers, boardrooms. But it never left, because injustice never does. It just waits to be turned into something else. Years later, at Harvard, when her ethics professor asked, "What's the most powerful form of resistance?" Most students said protest, or whistleblowing, or legislation. Celeste said, "Design." The class laughed. The professor didn't. He called her to his office that afternoon. "Tell me what you meant." She answered, "The problem isn't just what people do. It's what systems let them get away with. If you want to stop injustice, don't argue with it. Starve it. Make it impossible to breathe inside the structure." That one answer became a paper. That paper became a thesis. That thesis became her career. GridLink wasn't just a project. It was a response, not to the crew that denied her grandmother, but to the architecture that made them think they could and get away with it. People always asked, "Why didn't you sue the airline when you became powerful? Why not expose them? Why not use your voice?" And Celeste always smiled politely, because what she really wanted to say was, why build revenge when you can build rules? The moment she made the call from that first-class cabin, the day she was denied a seat because of how she looked, even in a suit, even with elite status, she knew what she was unleashing. She didn't need to yell. She just needed to flip the switch she'd been building for years. And when GridLock Tier 1 activated, freezing 152 airports and $8.1 billion in transactional flows, that wasn't anger. That was design. It wasn't about punishing airlines. It was about forcing recognition. Not of her, but of every woman who'd been asked to move. Every child with autism flagged for behavioral risk. Every elder called confused when they didn't understand fast enough. Every passenger whose tone, dress, or silence was used as an excuse for cruelty. After the ethics accord was signed, reporters tried to frame her as a reformer, a revolutionary, even a vigilante. She corrected none of them, but in her notebook, she wrote only one word beside each headline: architect. Her goal had never been to destroy. It was to interrupt, to insert a new variable into an old equation: dignity. 1 week after the accord passed, she returned to Detroit. No cameras. She stood alone at Gate B5. The bench was gone, but the air still felt the same. Cold. Assuming. She closed her eyes and whispered, "We made it, Nana." She didn't stay long. Just enough. Just a moment to remember where the blueprint started. Back in DC, her assistant asked her what the next plan was. Celeste paused, then handed over a thin envelope. Inside, her resignation as CEO of GridLink Systems, effective in 30 days. I've written the framework, now let others build inside it. She had one final request: that GridLink be governed by a rotating civilian oversight board, composed of former passengers who had experienced flagged events. No titles, no politicians, just people. The very ones the system was made to serve. Some advisors begged her to reconsider. You're at the peak. This is your legacy. Celeste smiled. No, my legacy isn't what I built. It's who I made room for. And then she stepped away. No tour, no farewell speech, just a quiet walk out the back door of the headquarters, like any passenger, leaving a terminal she helped redesign. Because justice, she knew, wasn't a moment. It was a structure, one that holds, even when the builder is gone. Has a moment in your past ever shaped everything you became? Tell us where you're watching from. And remember, the most powerful rebellion is not noise. It's the system you leave behind. It had been 2 years since the Accord. 2 years since airports started feeling different. Not perfect, but noticeably more human. At JFK, a flight attendant knelt beside a teenage boy with noise-canceling headphones. She didn't raise her voice. She used her hands, her body language, respectful, soft. And when the boy's mother mouthed, "Thank you," the attendant simply replied, "Passenger code 4, dignity first." At LAX, a crew member stood between a furious businessman and a pregnant black woman. The man had demanded her seat, said she didn't look like she belonged there. The crew member's voice was calm but firm. "Sir, your status doesn't override our ethics. Please return to your assigned seat." He paused, sat down, apologized later. These weren't isolated stories anymore. They were habits, new norms, rooted in something deeper than rules, a standard. And that standard still bore the signature of one name, Celeste Monroe. Even though she hadn't spoken publicly in 18 months, hadn't taken a stage, hadn't led a board meeting, her shadow stretched across terminals, training rooms, flight manuals, not by force, but by framework. She'd become what most leaders never do, a system. At a university in Chicago, a student stood before a packed lecture hall. Her name was Kiana James. 24, graduate student, double major, public ethics and systems engineering. She clicked to the next slide. Before 2025, airports were governed by logistics. After 2025, they were governed by logic, with empathy embedded. That shift came from one blueprint, the GridLink ethics infrastructure, architected by Celeste Monroe. But it belongs to all of us now. In the audience, a professor wiped away tears. He had once taught Celeste. Now he watched her legacy teach others. At a cafe in Lisbon, a retired pilot pulled out his phone, opened the GridLink Dignity dashboard, smiled. 88% crew dignity score this month, he muttered. That would have been unheard of back in my day. His granddaughter, only 10, leaned over. "What's a dignity score, Grandpa?" He thought for a second. "It's when people remember you're a person, even when you're tired." In Cape Town, at a regional ethics summit, a bold young woman presented a new concept, Flight Commons, a mobile app co-designed with displaced travelers, allowing passengers to flag and resolve discrimination in real time, verified by the new International GridLink Ethics Board. When someone asked what inspired her, she answered, "I was once denied boarding while wearing a hijab. A friend told me about a woman who changed the world with code instead of shouting. I decided to code too." All over the world, there were echoes. Soft, sharp, relentless echoes of a woman who had vanished from the headlines but remained stitched into policy, training, response teams, airport signage, and ethical architecture. Some still asked, where is she now? The answer, she was everywhere and nowhere. Celeste lived quietly now, in a small coastal town near Nova Scotia. No corporate jets, no meetings, no titles on her door. Just a single plaque in her garden, designed to last longer than applause. One morning, her niece, now 11, visited during spring break. They walked along the shore. The little girl looked up and asked, "Are you proud of what you built?" Celeste thought for a while, then answered, "I'm proud I left room for others to build more." That night, while her niece slept, Celeste opened an old notebook. Inside were letters, not to companies, to people. One read, "To the gate agent who once told a tired mother her crying baby wasn't her problem. I hope you found new training and maybe a little more heart." Another, "To the boy in 7A who watched his father be humiliated. I see you now, and I'm sorry it took the world so long to join us." And one final one, "To the girl on the bench at gate B5, you didn't cry, but I know you wanted to. I built a world where you wouldn't have to hold it in again." She closed the notebook, lit a candle, and whispered into the dark, "Keep going, whoever you are. You don't need my name. You just need to remember yours." The next morning, the international news quietly reported, GridLink ethics infrastructure has been adopted in 193 countries as of today. Passenger dignity ratings have increased globally by 38%. 4.1 million flagged cases resolved through civilian mediation. CEO Celeste Monroe remains unavailable for comment. But across airport terminals, something subtle had changed. Signs once marked "Security First" now read "Human First." AI voice assistants addressed passengers in their chosen language and tone. Crew badges now carried not just rank, but empathy certifications. One girl, just 6 years old, boarded a flight with her grandmother. The crew bent down, smiled, and said, "Welcome, we're honored to fly with you today." The little girl turned to her grandma and whispered, "She talks like you." Her grandmother laughed gently. "No, baby. She talks like someone who read Celeste's rules." In a mid-sized airport in Raleigh, North Carolina, a girl named Maya sat alone at gate 19. She was 10. Traveling alone for the first time, her flight was delayed. Her connection, uncertain. A crew supervisor passed by, tall, distracted. He barely glanced at her, but another woman, a gate agent in her late 40s, stopped, knelt. "Hey, sweetheart, you okay?" Maya nodded, but her eyes were glassy. The woman noticed the boarding pass in her lap, folded. The name printed, Maya Owens, minor, solo. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" The girl hesitated, then asked, "Am I allowed to sit in first class?" The agent blinked. "Why do you ask?" "My mom says people like us don't usually get that kind of seat, even when we earn it." There was silence, the kind that sits heavy, like truth waiting for permission. The woman smiled gently. "Let me tell you something." She pulled out a small card from her lanyard, not her badge, a quote card. On the back was written, "Passenger rule number 1, dignity boards before priority." Printed below it was a name, CM. This woman, Celeste Monroe, she helped write the rules airports follow now. She made sure no one ever makes a little girl feel second class again, not even quietly. Maya looked at the card, touched it like it was magic. Was she famous? Not in the way most people mean, but she made the sky fairer. That's its own kind of famous. The gate agent stood. "You stay right there, Maya. I'm going to make a call." 10 minutes later, Maya was seated. First row, warm blanket, hot cocoa. Not because of her name or money, but because someone remembered the blueprint. 2 rows back, an off-duty flight instructor watched it all happen. She opened her phone, texted a colleague. "Still happening, still working. Monroe lives in the cracks we remember to seal." And just like that, another thread was stitched. Quiet, unseen, permanent. Because legacy, Celeste once said, isn't what gets carved into plaques. It's the moments no one records, but someone lives differently because of. What would the world look like if we all carried a little Celeste with us? Maybe we already are. Tell us where you're watching from.